You too. All right, Sean, it's all yours.
All right. Well, I think I'll make it all Carter's. And
Then,
Carter is pasting the doc
Mhm.
for this meeting into the chat. If you have a minute to go to that. Today is, I guess I will take, let me take notes, Carter. Oh, I see.
Yeah, so I've already got some stuff up.
23, yeah.
So yeah, we officially had our release today, probably about an hour ago after the GitHub incident. Did you guys, was that affecting y'all as well? Yeah. Right. I was gonna, well, yeah.
yeah.
We were literally issuing the pull request to master, and
yeah, it just was like went down.
Broke.
Amazing timing.
Yeah, yep. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. It was especially annoying because I couldn't merge the build I couldn't merge the pull request to begin with because the build failed because it was building as GitHub failed. So it couldn't clone. And so because the synchronization broke, because GitHub broke, I couldn't restart it without making just a bogus commit. So I just like changed one line in the docs, and that was how I got it to fix. It's like, I love it, GitHub. But yeah, so we've been talking about this for a while, this release. Do you want me to go through like the major highlights, Sean? I mean, I know we've been doing that kind of week by week, but maybe it'd be helpful to get an overview of everything.
Let's see,
There's a lot, so I hope I get to the important stuff.
Did you, so first of all, we haven't tagged the release yet, have we?
Oh, no, we have not.
Let me just tag it really quick, and then I'll share my screen. Isn't there do we not have the
what are you looking for?
I was looking for the that tool that puts together a compilation of all the commits and things.
No, I got rid of that because it would have given you 750 lines of stuff to edit, and most of it would not have made much sense.
Okay.
So my intention was that, I mean, I already put some of the change set in the pull request itself. Let me pull it up. Oh, goodness. And there's more stuff than what I put in here. Here, Sean, let me Slack it to you. So I'll just go ahead and start talking about some of them if you want while you're doing that.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So probably the first major thing that we should probably talk about is that we now officially have Docker containers for both the front end and the back end, as well as the database, both an empty database and one that has some data already pre-filled into it. So that's actually what we use for our testing environment for developers. And that's also for people who just want to, start messing around with the data we have, the metrics. If they don't want to, do their own specific data collection, they can use that. But, there's a couple different ways you can use it, but it's designed to be pretty easy. All you have to do is, if you have a basic understanding of Docker, all you have to do is just put some configuration stuff in a file, depending on how exactly you want to connect to it, and then hit go, and it starts it up and reads all of your repos and just starts running with it. So that'll be, especially for community managers, that's really the use case we were targeting. With this, it really allowed them to get going faster, and they won't have to sit through, we've made the installation experience a lot better, I hope. But, this is an even more accelerated version of that. That's, I think, going to be super awesome.
And I did just tag the release. I will share my screen. You have to You have a question, Matt?
Yeah, for Cardiff, just on the Docker stuff.
Yeah.
Matt.
I think both Matts did. Go for it.
Carter, for the Docker release, is the backend, I mean, does it contain everything? I assume it's the database, does it come pre-populated with some data or no?
So we provide a separate, so the backend image is all the backend code. So it's the workers, the Python library with the REST API. It's really those two things. And then there's a separate database image that you can use if you want to. So we have a version of that with no data in it, just the schema, so you can completely fill it with your own stuff. And there is a version that has some data pre-populated, and it's up to you to use those. And we also provide a functionality of connecting to an outside non-Docker database. So if you wanted to do like a permanent instance, like if, using a Docker container for a database in production is not a super good idea, just because of what Docker is intended for.
How Docker works.
Right.
If we issue a new container, it's going to destroy your old container when you rebuild. So
yeah,
Docker advises strongly against using a Docker container for data you want to keep.
Yeah.
Use all your data.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bad, and they tell
so
you
want
that.
to avoid that.
It's very clear.
So did I hear right that 3 different Docker containers?
So there's actually 4, and then so there's the back end, the 2 database ones, and then there's also a front end. So if you want to, you can use the front end, and then what's special about the front end image is that there's also functionality that we built out for interacting with the repos in the database with the UI. So you no longer have to insert repos and repo groups from the command line. Once you start the Docker container, there's a special link that you can, a special location on the container that you can go to, and it's just a really simple UI for loading repos in. But that's only for the Docker container.
Okay.
And they can all be built with so Docker has the idea of a container, but there's also this notion or this function of Docker Compose. So it isn't as though you have to download the distinct Docker containers. You can do there's a Docker Compose command that will build your whole infrastructure for evaluation and testing at once. That's correct, right, Carter?
Yeah, pretty much. It basically composes the containers together in a pre-configured way with a single command. So you don't have to build and run like 3 separate tabs in your terminal. You can just, so long as your environment file is correct. And if you're doing, it can be as simple as a GitHub API key. And then if you do Docker Compose with the backend, front end, and the database, it just all brings it up all within Docker and then just starts going on its own. The only thing you need is a GitHub API key. So that's like the most streamlined use case.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, and I think the other core things that are in this release are, I'll focus on contributors. So we have a new worker that resolves contributor. So when a person has 10 email addresses or 2 email addresses, basically if you have more than 1 email address that you've used to make a commit or open an issue, we are able to, as long as you have a GitHub user or a GitLab user, we can resolve many of those emails to the same user, so that when you see commit totals, there'll be a canonical user that right now we determine basically based on the first email that we discover. And then so when you see lists of commits or contributions by an individual, that can be that will include all of the distinct email addresses that individual has used over time. We've also updated the affiliations so that we have a core set of affiliations that get populated, so you don't start with no affiliations. We have a set of corporate and open source domains that are common that we resolve to specific companies or organizations. That's one thing. I'll pause and breathe there and ask if there are any questions.
So it sounded like there were 2 things. I'm trying to jot these down in the notes, but
yeah, there are 2 things. One is the contributor email address resolution, and the second is the increased, I guess, library of affiliations. So you can see affiliation data at the organizational level.
Okay, I got it. Okay, this
And
was the conversation that had come up about possibly sharing, not
yes,
sharing the organizational affiliation data as a shared JSON file or whatever between
right.
the different.
Basically, yeah, the idea is the domain list that is mapped to an organization to share that as a resource that everyone can use in whatever format.
Is all of this stuff being handled via the facade worker?
No, the contributor worker is actually doing the affiliation resolution work now.
Okay.
And that's because the facade worker relied on you as a user maintaining the list of domains.
Okay.
And the mapping of contributors to domains.
Okay.
And instead of doing that, we actually have the contributor worker. And you also, when a person changed, you had to add a new record that the individual changed affiliations.
Okay.
So what we do now is certainly imperfect, but significantly more automated. When a new organizational domain commit appears anywhere, from that moment forward, that person, so like if I'm always committing with my Gmail address, but periodically with my corporate address, which is quite common, when I have a new corporate address commit, then it will then count my contributions from that point forward in that organization. And it's, obviously there's a sort of a probabilistic guessing that's happening there, but it substantially reduces the amount of human labor involved in maintaining those affiliations.
That makes sense.
And I think I'd like to, it's just, we're one little line here, pull requests, but there's actually a significant advancement that Gabe implemented in our pull request logic and what we are storing and keeping for pull requests. So there are, one of the questions that's arisen is, for pull requests that are not committed to master, what about them is different in terms of size or scope or parts of the project that are addressed. And so we have two new database tables that are populated by the pull request worker. One is a pull request commits, and the other is pull request files. And so we can now show you 4 pull requests that were never merged into master, how much work was included in these not merged pull requests, or pull requests that were moving about in different branches or of a project. And so it helps people, it will help people to draw contrasts between attempted contributions and actual contributions that wasn't previously possible in any tool.
So is this about kind of trying to get a better handle on the contributions that are occurring localized spaces of a project?
It's more about understanding the pull requests that are denied. If a pull request is closed and not committed, there isn't any tool before this that lets you contrast the size, composition, like lines of code, the types of files, the part of the project that is involved in the failed or the not merged pull request, the pull request that never made it to master, and those that did make it to master. And so I think this data will be useful for a number of organizations for answering questions about non-merged pull requests.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Or did I still not explain it well enough?
It does. I guess whenever this is still associated with affiliations, right? I mean, the way
No, it's not. There's no connection to affiliations. I should probably create another line there.
Oh, that was,
and explain that a little bit more thoroughly.
okay. I guess that was my confusion. So, okay, that makes more sense now.
Yeah, I'll just add that line while we're talking. And then there's also a significant change in our documentation And Carter, I'll stop sharing my screen, and if I can find the place to do that, and then maybe you can show off the new and improved documentation that,
Sure.
that Augur has, because I think I think we did a fair job of documenting before, but in the fall we spent a good deal of effort making our installation process much easier. That is now substantially more robust and improved. But in addition, and I think more importantly at this point, the way that we have documented and explained Augur, how it works, what it does, is way, I'll call it way better. And let Carter go on.
Yeah, so the documentation, not all of it, I'll just say up front, not all of it has immediately been rewritten. There are things that we have removed for the time being, simply because we felt it was not pertinent to include it at this point. We wanted to get this out because we've been waiting on this release for a while. So this stuff is just the first round of it, and upcoming releases will continue to flesh all of the other stuff out. But very briefly, and I know we've gone over some of this before, but I'll kind of skim through this as fast as I can while still being useful. So this is the landing page, just some stuff, table of contents, what Augur is, people who work on it. And then we jump right into the getting started section. So this talks a little bit about what we're going to do in the installation section, mentions Docker if you're looking for it, some notes about what systems we support, and then we jump right into the database setup. From here, walking through setting up a Postgres installation somewhere via Docker or some other thing, or some other, if you're going to do a permanent installation. From there, we go through creating the database with the correct privileges and a user, and then making sure that once all that is set up, then we're going to jump into the installation. Before I keep going, I know I breezed through that really fast. Does anybody want me to go back over it, or should I just keep going?
No, go ahead. I mean, this is just about kind of doc improvement, so.
Yep.
Well, I have a quick question. The installation steps, are those pretty much the same as previously, or did they change as well? I know the Docker section is pretty new.
So I think the installation steps have not changed too much. I've done some, there is one new, no, the steps have not changed. What the steps do has changed, but no, for the most part, it's still, you just basically need to clone it and then run make install if you're doing for just a regular production installation. And then if you're doing a developer installation, there's a specific command that you run, but it's very similar to the other one. Just making sure some dependencies get installed in the correct way. So the steps are pretty much the same. We just tried to document what you need and how to do it a little bit better.
Great. Yeah, I'll do a fresh run in the next week or so. I ran through the first one, had some trouble. I'm pretty comfortable on command line and things, but not at troubleshooting view errors. So kind of just backed away slowly. But
that's fair.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let me know if you find anything that breaks, because I'll fix it as fast as I can.
Thanks, Carter.
Of course. But we'll go through this really quickly. So we just talked a little bit about the backend dependencies. Required is GitHub Access Token and Python 3.6 or later, and that's really it. The optional dependencies for Go, if you're going to use the value worker, because it's not part of our core data set, I would say it's, well, okay, I won't say it that way.
It's a worker that is written in Python, but it makes a call to a project that is written in Go.
Yeah.
And basically takes the output of that project and stores it in a table called repo labor. That includes essentially an enumeration of each file in a repository at a point in time, along with a Kokomo-based complexity score for that file, and I believe labor estimate, or the labor estimate can be derived through a future API endpoint.
Yeah, here's an example for Redis. But yeah.
So so that's a summary that can be derived from it. We store information about each discrete file in a repository at a point in time. And our default is to just run that every month when you start Augur. So like that's not something that's going to change so often that you need to run it very frequently. I think you could run it annually and it would be fine.
Right.
But we default to a month, which is a pretty low iteration level, but appropriate for something like that. Basically analyzes the complexity of each file in your project and lets you make those kinds of summaries.
But that's we only use Go for that worker, so that's why it's kind of considered optional. It's not like it's if you want that data, you'll need it. But you can get everything else with Python. And then a little bit about front-end dependencies, just some Node stuff, and then Vue.js, which is the framework that our front-end is built with. And then really, the star of the show, actually installing it. So you basically just need to clone it, make sure you have a virtual environment. Augur is required to run in a virtual environment. It will not work if you don't. The install script will prompt you to create one and activate it if you forgot to do this step. But this is just setting it up beforehand and then actually running the install script with some notes about generating an Augur API key, which you'll need for some specific API calls. And then if you install front-end dependencies, just some stuff about weird dependency errors that don't mean anything. That's like, if you see it, don't worry about it. But that's basically it for installing. The make install script will ask you for your database credentials and to set up a couple other things. But it will generate the config for you. It will install the dependencies and configure the database schema if it needs to. All of that good stuff will be taken care of by the make install command. Once we're done with that, do you have any questions about that, or should I keep going? All right, I'll keep going.
So here we're basically explaining our data collection worker and what workers and what they do and how they work a bit more clearly than we have in the past.
Yeah, specifically with a focus on the options that pertain to configuring them to collect the data that you want. For most everything, we recommend you can like keep we try to pick the same defaults. If you're collecting, these are mostly like you might need to change some of these if you're collecting a large number of collecting data for a large number of repositories. Yeah, most of the stuff I won't spend too much time talking about it. Just talk a little bit about the workers that are available, the data that they can collect, how to insert repos, and then just some other things to be aware of. And then at this point, once you've gotten through this, you should have a fully functioning and configured Augur instance. If nothing went terribly wrong, that's the hope.
And you don't actually need to go this far to have a fully functional installed instance, because the defaults are to collect the repositories that you add and run the workers over them. The one that we don't, the couple that we don't turn on automatically are the one that rely on Go and relies on Go, and that's just to keep it simple because we think there's a subset of people that are interested in that data. And the insight worker, which is, it basically looks for, it's an anomaly detection algorithm or set of algorithms that will post to the Slack bot that we plan to release in the next 5 or 6 days, that will let you essentially, anytime there's an anomaly over a period of time. So if you say you want to I want to look at the last 2 years and I want to see anything unusual in my repository in the last week, and I only want to see the top 5, or I only want to focus on these repositories, you'll get a Slack notification through a Slack bot of some kind of anomaly in the repository collection that you're watching. So it's a push notification as opposed to relying on the dashboard.
I like that. But
no, we've been talking about that. We've been working on it for over a year, and I think we haven't released it yet. And I think I've mentioned this before, because if you have a lot of repositories and you train the data over a long period of time, you're going to get a lot of notifications every single day, and it's going to be very, push notifications that over notify you just get ignored. And so
did you mention the timing of these push notifications? We had talked about that last time.
yeah, that we want to do it, I think in the morning.
1 a.m. or 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And then what's the intended interface for that? So like if I wanted to obviously kind of point at the specific repos that I want, and I want to set up like a 2 sigma variation, you know what I mean? Like
let me see if I can find the variation piece is in the Augur.config.json, and it's essentially represented as I believe it's called contamination.
The explanation for it is right here.
Yeah. And I'm going to see if I can find the latest version of the design.
If you're looking for the config,
I know I've seen it.
Are you just looking for the explanation of what contamination
I'm looking for the
is?
screenshot, the most recent screenshot that we have of, and I think I might be the only one that has it.
Which screenshot?
I'm going to share it right now. Copy image. Actually, if you let me share the screen for a second, Carter.
I just stopped sharing.
Okay. So this is what the configuration will look like for Augie. So you'll have, we call it Augie. You'll have your repo groups. Obviously, these are just dummy repo groups. So a listing of all your repos and what group they're in. And you can just, I think, check or drag and drop the repos that you want to track. Obviously, you can track them all. We would do have a one-time where you specify the Augur host URL that you're going to use. So we don't provide a list of Augur host URLs. You have to know yours. And that's simply because we don't want to give away everybody's, we want the Augur instances that people have running that we know about not to be listed on something
this is an API, right?
Yeah. And so basically you list your Augur host URL because that'll give you your list of repos, let you decide how to track them. These are the metrics that we're currently tracking insights for. Obviously those will grow over time. And then here's where you specify the number of notifications per day. And this is just something that you do inside of Slack. The one architectural decision that we made that is, but I don't know, it's a little different than other architectural decisions that we've made, is that everyone's Slack notification is going to go through the same Amazon Lex endpoint that we have. So you can actually ask the Augie some questions as well. And over time, Augie will learn, Augie will learn how to answer questions that it cannot answer. But things like what are my most active repos, you'll be able to ask Augie that as well as getting push notifications. And the notifications per day, like if you put 10, you'll get the 10 most anomalous notifications. And if you put 3, you'll get the 3 most anomalous. I don't know that we've allowed unlimited notifications, so I don't know what 0 will do. That would be the logical way to do unlimited, but I don't think anybody wants that. But we could make that a feature in the future. And then once you save it, that's how it's configured for your Slack instance.
Ask a question here. It might, do you give the user the chance to kind of understand how these anomalies are detected? So I'm guessing it's a a moving average and some standard deviation away from that.
Do we explain how the anomalies are detected? Is your question?
Yeah.
We don't. It sounds like that would be an important thing to do.
Maybe. I mean, you could. I mean, you can just. It's not even. I had suggested maybe allowing them to change how they're detected, but maybe just the first simple step would just be like putting like under notifications per day.
Yeah.
Text box that just says anomalies are detected by calculating a 5-day moving average, and then I don't know how you do it, but
yeah. So it's anomalies are detected. There, it is parameterizable on the server. So the training period, it defaults to a year, and the notification. What is the notification or the anomaly period default to right now?
The anomaly period defaults to 2. The training days default to 365.
Just a year.
And I do know we use an isolation forest is one of the things that we use.
Yeah.
That's all I know. I've seen that before.
Yeah. That's the main algorithm that we're using right now. Although we expect to add and refine the algorithms we use for anomaly detection in the future. But yeah, we can explain that under notifications per day. And that's probably, it also probably warrants an explanation that, you know, how many notifications you get per day is something you're more or less concerned about if you have a larger or smaller collection of repos in your Augur repository. If you have 7,000 repos, if you only get 3 notifications per day, as long as you've selected the list of whichever of those 7,000 you're most concerned about, you're cool. And if not, then it's going to be harder. You'll also be able to search host repos. So for example, if you have 7,000 repos and 250 repo groups, you can search for the repo group name and then just check the ones in that repo group that you're most concerned about. I'm going to stop sharing now because unless there's further questions about this. Okay, I will stop my share.
All right. Should we go ahead and finish through the documentation?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So at this point, you know, you should have everything ready, configured. And then I won't go through these because that would take too long and it's not really a point. But this is just the section that details the command line interface for interacting with Augur, interacting with the database, interacting with the server, some utility and configuration commands. That's all I'll say about that. There's not really any point in going through all of those in detail right now. And then this is the section, this is just the section about Docker, getting started and configuring it with the config file, and then working with Docker if you're going to use individual containers, Docker Compose if you want to use them together. And then once the containers are up, interacting with them, viewing logs, using that UI that I mentioned. That sort of stuff is on here. And then the development guide is pretty light for right now, but that just has some specific instructions for configuring for development. So like I mentioned earlier, there's this specific, you just run make install dev if you're doing for development. It runs the script a little bit differently, installs packages in editable mode, and some other libraries that you'll need for testing and doing documentation work. And then there is a section on make commands, and I won't go through those for the same reason I won't go through the CLI, just kind of boring. And then under documentation, this is just the library and usage documentation, like how to build that, which is what this is. And then
we say, wait a minute,
API
when you say library and usage, Kirk, can you tell me what you mean? Is that just a documentation library? So if you wanted to build a local copy of this documentation, which you really wouldn't need to do because it's on read the docs, but
you do. If you're gonna edit the docs, you should check the changes before you do it, which is why you need to know how to do this.
So before I pushed a couple changes to docs this morning, I should have checked them.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll say, like, when I saw library in usage, I thought it was like API library.
There is an API. There is library documentation, like, for the actual code. It's not linked in here, but it does exist, and you build it the same way that you build this, which is why it says library in usage. So
yeah, it might just be like a clash of terminology that.
yeah, there's probably a better name for this. And really the reason that it has this name is because the API documentation is technically separate. Like, it's not, you don't do it the same way. But I'm actually almost done rewriting it so that it's all in this way, like all through this single like web page. It's all on Read the Docs, and so then there won't be any difference. You can just be building the documentation, and then hopefully that'll make things clearer.
And we're also, there's a few things we decided not to do in this release just because there was already so much in it. But there'll be links to the documentation, links to the API documentation, links to the Augur website, links to CHAOSS on the front page of Augur at the bottom, links to submitting a bug or an issue at the bottom of each instance of Augur as well in the future. So it'll be easier just from within a running instance of Augur to know where everything is and not have to think about it. We just decided not to. There's some things we just left out of this release because there was already so much in it.
That's it for the documentation as it is right now.
Okay.
There's some other stuff. I know Gabe, besides the new contributor and pull request workers, I know he's also made a huge number of like stabilization updates and enhancements to make things go faster and work better. I don't know what all of them are. He would have a better list of those than I do.
Yeah, I can share briefly what they are. I'll share my screen. I guess you have to unshare yours.
I already did.
So under the pull request worker, probably I could mention basically what we've done is in the augur.conf, there's this augur.config.json file, and within it, in the documentation, it explains that you can increase the number of workers that you have doing each task. And there are really three main areas of the augur.config.json. Where's the default one, Carter?
It's in Augur. Go to Augur. CLI. Configure.py.
Okay.
It's at the top. It's that default.
All right. So you specify the database. There's a couple of key parameters that will make your collection and analysis go faster if you have a large data set. And we should probably emphasize these in a future release. One is this multi-threaded parameter under facade. We default it to 0 because facade will be greedy. It will take all available CPUs on your machine if you let it. So we default it to not multi-threaded, but if you're running a server or you're running a machine that's focused on data collection, multi-threaded facade, you don't mind if it eats all your cores. The other parameter that we specify that's pretty important is in the worker block. I guess in the server block, there's a number of server workers. If you have a lot of people using your front end and hitting the API or a lot of workers running, you may want to increase that number so there's no waiting there. And if you're doing a lot of analysis on a lot of CPUs, you may also want to increase the timeout. That probably we should default a little bit higher, but
that timeout is actually specific. It's really for if you inserting a lot of repos, with the UI can take a long time, like importing lots of
I see.
repositories.
So that's UI focused.
That was added specifically for that reason. Like if you're going to be adding like a GitHub organization with like several hundred repos, the query like might take a really long time to return because it's just churning through so many of them. So that's what that timeout is mainly for. I mean, if you have other things that take a long time, you could raise that, but that's what that one's for.
Okay. And then under each worker block, there's the switch is basically, if it's 1, it's on, if it's 0, it's off. And the workers is literally the number of workers that you have running. So one of the things that Gabe optimized in this latest release is it spreads. So the way that we handle like if you put 6 in the workers for the GitHub worker and 6 in the worker for the pull request worker, which if you have a ton of repos is not a bad idea, it's going to be sure to distribute the load across all 6 of those workers evenly, instead of seeing which has got, it does it slightly, it optimizes it in a way that ensures that you have multiple workers. If you say 6 workers, you've got 6 workers doing the work all at once. And the pull requests and the GitHub workers are the ones really where you are going to, in all likelihood, if you're doing a large set of repositories, want to increase the number of workers, because there's a depth of inquiry, for lack of a better word, that's happening, or I guess a depth of API calls that occur with those workers to get information about comments, information about tags, information about files. There's a lot of depth. There's many API calls involved in each repository's iteration of that worker. So the more GitHub and pull request workers specifically that you have, the faster that you'll get your initial data collection. And then once you are finished with your initial data collection, you could reduce the number of workers or leave it higher, but everything goes pretty fast. Like once it's the initial data collection where increasing the number of workers has the highest return on investment, if you will. And let's see, the only other thing I would mention about like things we want to configure that maybe later we want to highlight is the housekeeper will have there's a parameter for the GitHub worker that has to do with efficiency and completeness. So all focused means that the GitHub worker is going to make sure that it has all of the issues associated with a particular repository. GitHub's API can be a little wonky for issues, and so we had do some special additional work on the initial collection to make sure that you have all of the issues. After the initial collection, you could turn all focused off, and it would use slightly fewer API calls, than it does when it's running all focused. Although I haven't had any problems with it running fast enough under all focused at all. And then I guess maybe the only other thing that warrants mentioning is, and this probably also warrants documentation. Carter, are you taking, is somebody taking notes?
I was taking some notes, but
okay. Yeah. The other thing I'll mention is there is a table in the Augur operations schema called what's it called? I can't show it to you because it's the data. There's data that's in it that will give you my API keys. But if you have more than one API key, the table's name is worker_OAuth. And so if you're working with a number of people and you want to have more than one API key available to Augur for making multiple API calls,
GitHub API keys.
GitHub API keys, so that you can make more. So basically, you can make more API calls, proportional to the number of collaborators that you have, the more API keys you put in the OAuth table, the more API calls you'll have available, and the workers are checking the available rate limit on those. We don't document that and exactly clearly because it could be misused by people. You could get a bunch of fake API keys and make more API calls and get yourself banned by GitHub. But if you legitimately have a lot of people interested in the data that will share API keys, then you'll get a proportional to the labor investment and developer investment in the collection of repositories that you're trying to get data for. You get a sort of a fair proportion of API calls that will also allow you to collect GitHub data faster. And if you run out of API calls, the workers are designed to just wait. They'll just say, okay,
you've got you with the shortest waiting time. And just wait until it's done and then go again.
Yeah, and if you're out of keys that have available calls, it'll just put itself in a holding pattern for the number of seconds that you have to wait. And GitHub will tell you that, and you're good to go. So that concludes, I think, the overview of this, I think, very significant new release of Augur. Any questions, desires, hopes, dreams?
No, this is great. Thank you.
Yeah. Matt, King, Kevin, anything else that you want to ask about, talk about, experiment with?
It's super cool to see. I'm still looking forward to picking your and/or Dawn's brain on her configuration. I know she's done some custom metrics on top using Augur, and she said that's been an exceptional improvement to her reporting.
So this is, we've talked about this in other calls. One of the things about dashboards is that you can build dashboards to your heart's content, but Augur has a lot more data available in it than we could ever put on a useful dashboard. So perhaps at some point we'll use something like Grafana to build a set of options for dashboards that you can run for the front end. But meanwhile, what we've been doing with Dawn and with others is building Jupyter notebooks that visualize, that run queries against the Augur database that you have, and do visualizations using different Python tools in Jupyter notebooks. And and so we will release those Jupyter notebooks, obviously, without some of the only thing that, like, there's repo IDs in some of them that, you obviously would want to have it be your own repo ID. And so we need to add, like, get your list of repo IDs, or identify a list of repo IDs that you want to do this analysis for. Most of the use cases are, I want to compare a set of repos within my organization with each other to see which of these projects and how these projects are different based on lots of different factors that are internal to an organization. In other cases, people are collecting data again for their project and for projects they compete against. And so there's analysis that will compare. I mean, you can use the same Jupyter notebooks to do internal or external comparisons, but you can also do competitive analysis of project health with these queries as well, if you choose to collect data for like all of the projects in a particular space, like web frameworks, for example. And then obviously with the addition of the affiliation data and the resolution of email addresses, you can also start to get a sense of how your developers are contributing to different projects.
Yeah.
One of the things that one of the things on our roadmap is to actually, once we identify a developer, to make an enumeration of projects that they're contributing to in addition to your projects. available, and that's an idea that's emerged out of our collaboration. We call that our snowball. Basically, you can snowball and try to understand where developer energy is moving within an ecosystem based on where the people who are contributing to your project are moving. And that kind of information, I think, is useful to a lot of folks.
It'd be fun to see that evolution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all roadmap stuff, but it's actually, it's also, as we've gotten to know the APIs and the way that you can get things better, it looks a lot easier to do now than it did a year ago. So. Yeah, we should. I think Gabe's not on the call, so I can't. But Gabe and Andrew are working on those Jupyter notebooks, and Andrew's going to be working with us full time, along with some Google Summer of Code students this summer. So I would expect a public version of those notebooks to be released in the next 30 days. We're not holding them back for any other reason than that when we release them, we want to have them look organized so that you don't just get this jumble of Jupyter notebooks and you have no idea exactly what they do or how to use them. And obviously it's a slightly different technology than like we don't need to do read the docs.io. We need to document in Markdown inside the notebooks what you're doing there. Which we've done some of, but it's just not, I would say it's not mature enough quite yet to make it something that just confuses people. And Matt, if you're interested in taking a look at those notebooks and against different sets of repositories that you gather, if you or others want access recognizing the limitations, we'd welcome your feedback.
Cool. Yeah. A little busy through next week because we're doing but I'm down. I love playing in Jupyter notebooks. I think they're just such a great interface. So I don't have a lot of repos I care about, but I can certainly just run it against our collection of them at CHAOSS and just start looking at activity. It'd be fun.
Yeah. And I think so. Another consideration is because it's a relational database, some of the queries in these Jupyter notebooks are very complex. And another thing that we're doing with those queries is Andrew has been taking, like, I've got this one giant complex query that feeds a lot of visualizations for different things. And Andrew has been breaking those out into separate API endpoints so that eventually within the Jupyter notebook, instead of having to digest this gigantic SQL statement and try to understand what it means, you can simply pull from an endpoint and get a data set and do analysis. Not that it would not restrict you from accessing your own database, but some people are more or less comfortable with SQL. And if you're less comfortable with SQL, having an endpoint will be an easier way for you to work in a Jupyter notebook than SQL.
Yeah, heads up. I think anything that kind of works right now is great. And then nothing will be perfect once it gets to a bunch of users, but as long as I can get to them, I'm down.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to play at some point, just let us know, and we'll give you some of those to play with. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we've got a few minutes left. I'll briefly just say it's interesting how we got to Jupyter notebooks. It's almost accidental. I had been just writing a bunch of queries to answer questions for people, and I got to a stakeholder who didn't know how to visualize the data I was providing, and that was at that moment I realized I needed to build that person Jupyter notebooks and give them visualizations. Because otherwise just giving them the data would not be useful. So moved from, just, it was sort of a natural and organic output.
I love it. It's like a heartwarming story of actually helping somebody, right?
Yeah. Or a fear-invoking story of, holy shit, now I have to build Jupyter notebooks.
Fair point.
But yeah, then it does end up being, I think, a good way to expose a lot of the data that it would take a really long time to build dashboards for.
Yeah, I think if you're making the data accessible, like that's all anyone that's a community manager is really asking for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Help me help myself.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you have the queries, no matter how complex, if they run and they work, like,
Yeah.
and you got a bokeh or whatever matplotlib set up ready to go. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, there's sort of like with SQL, it's some people are real comfortable with it and don't need to understand why the logic is valid. Other people have phobia about SQL and are overwhelmed or intimidated by some of the sizes of the queries and they need to understand everything.
Right.
And and we do a lot of validation internally with the queries that we write, obviously. And some of the, I guess another roadmap thing to mention, now almost out of time, is we have internally a bunch of queries that we run against GitHub's metadata to validate that we've collected all of the pull requests, issues, comments, commits, and things like that. And eventually we'll make those available like as part of a page in Augur so that you can know how complete you are at a moment in time. And it's usually, like in a perfect world, it's always equal, but the metadata worker doesn't run always in the exact same moment as the pull request worker. So as long as you're in the 0.99 to 0.1 or 1.1, 1.01 range, it's very rare that you're over 1. As long as you're in the 0.99 range, you can be reasonably assured that you're pretty up to date. And that's, I think, reassuring to people as well. So that's why we'll probably put a page together for that at some point.
That's smart. It's a good feedback loop.
Yeah.
Right on.
All right.
It's good to see everyone.
Good to see everybody. We're out of time, and thanks for hanging out, and talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.